And in one of the sieges, the Portuguese found to their dismay that the Dutch ships were coming through the South Channel. Let's say, from the backyard of the island of Mozambique. Just so you have to find a solution for that. So instead of using this graduation of 0 degrees, 90 and 0, the Portuguese turned it around that they actually need another line. That was the Treaty of Zaragoza. Now we figured it out. Okay, hello everyone and welcome to Underwater Adventures with Alex Mirabal. Today we have a very interesting episode because we will be talking about espionage, spies and war secrets during the age of the discoveries or the age of the exploration. So let's dive into it. For most of us, when we hear about espionage and spies trying to get some secrets from another country, we instinctively think about the First World War, the Second World War, the Cold War, but this has been going on since ever. Whenever there was a chance of taking any advantage from your enemy or your adversary or a neighboring country that has a greener grass than yours, you will try to do it. So this obviously was very intense in the time of the discoveries or the time of exploration, the age of exploration, which is when Europe tried to expand and conquer new territories. They were new to them. And this is very interesting because many times during our research and our work, we come across things that just put that into perspective, that give you this feeling that, how these guys did this and why did that. So I will try to share this with you with some examples. Obviously, it is necessary to give some context. Remember that as early as 1494, meaning just 2 years later than Columbus discovered America, already Spain and Portugal sit together and make a treaty, the Treaty of Tordesillas, which is named Tordesillas because it was the Spanish city in which they sat together. Yeah, exactly. Where they sat together, I just simply split the world for them. So
they just decided, left for you, right for me, and that's it, without asking anyone anything, without asking the Asians, the Africans, the Americans, Native Americans, nobody cares.
No, they were out of the picture. So Portugal and Spain, they make this treaty, they draw a line from pole to pole in which they said, okay, west of that line is yours, Spanish, and east of that line is mine, Portugal.
Or like Dumbos like me, left or right.
Exactly. Well, okay, east or west or left or right, or left or right. The fact is that they single-handedly split the world for both of them. Okay, so they didn't get into any conflict. Okay, this started being a very nice treaty. The Treaty of Tordesillas is quite famous and it set a base for many of the things that happened later. Obviously, the Dutch and the English, they were not happy. They said, what?
Nobody asked us.
These guys are just splitting the world between them. Where do we stand?
Yeah, who? So, nobody is asking us. Why are they not asking us?
In reality, no other country followed that treaty aside of Portugal and Spain. Because even today you can understand that, okay, you can do whatever you think is good for you, but I don't need to follow up.
Yeah, I mean, it's something that you learn Sorry to make it very unsexy, this example, but it's exactly like HR. You can put whatever you want in a contract, in a working contract. Whatever is applicable by law is different. So as a company, you can write whatever you want, but that doesn't mean it applies. They made a contract and a treaty that just for them, the rest of the world acted as if it didn't exist because it didn't for them.
Exactly, but I tell you a little bit more. Thing is that they apparently they realize a little bit later that single line that they draw in the map from pole to pole dividing the world for any of the two countries, being the world, by then they knew that the world was round.
No way. No flat earthers back then? What?
Well, they might have been, but the guys who make the decisions, they knew that the world was round. So a single line from pole to pole will not divide anything. You can go all the way this way or all the way this way. So they decide as soon as 1529, so meaning like 30 some years later, that they actually need another line. And that was the Treaty of Zaragoza, which they draw another line, so they actually divide the world in two parts.
They're like, now
Portugal.
We get it. Now it's correct.
Now we figured it out. Okay, so that was Spain, the owner of part of the world, and Portugal, owner of the newly discovered territories of the other part of the world. Okay, of course, England and the Netherlands, they were not happy with this, and they made a coalition, they make an alliance between the two countries against the Portuguese and the Spaniards, that by the time that we are talking about this, they had made what is known as the Iberian Union, which was not anything else than Portugal and Spain together, because a king married to a queen from the different countries. So it's known also as the time of the two crowns, when Portugal and Spain were together between 1580 and 1640. And the Dutch and the English, they obviously went into war with Portugal and Spain, and they tried to stop this expansion from these two countries and at least get a part of the cake.
Yeah.
Because this is what it was after all.
Yeah.
And that takes us to the subject that we want to talk today, which is how certain information from each country or each group was so important for the adversary to get hold on that. Imagine that, like naval construction. The Portuguese ships, for instance, they were big, they were bulky, they were ships that were meant mainly for trade, meaning that the ships will hold the biggest amount of cargo possible in comparison to other countries. They were armed, obviously, they were warships, but they had this storage capacity which was way bigger than other countries. On the other hand, the Dutch had smaller and faster ships, which made them more appropriate or more useful for naval battles and to harass the Portuguese and the Spaniards. So obviously this was something that for both nations or both groups was important to get a grasp of what happened with these guys. How can they do this?
How can they come so quickly?
Exactly. There are very clear examples. And that's why I wanted to bring it up, because the naval construction, the architecture to build ships, was not only important for each of the countries to develop and to grow and to make better ships. It was also to prevent some of the military actions that could harm your country. We have the perfect example in the island of Mozambique, where there was a very strong Portuguese settlement, and the Dutch and the English, they had this combined fleet that was called the Fleet of Defense, which has always been very funny to me because it's called the Fleet of Defense.
And they're attacking
in Africa. They were attacking the Portuguese and they were in Africa.
Yeah.
I don't really know what they were
Africa wasn't
defending.
attacking them at all. Africa was minding their own business.
Whatsoever. But for instance, in the island of Mozambique, you have the island is more more or less orientated north to south. They have the main channel, the main entry to the harbor of the island is through the north. It's a deep and wide channel. And in the south, you have another channel, which is much more shallow, and that, for instance, the ships were not go that way. So the Portuguese built the San Sebastian fortress to protect the entry of the harbor from the north, because that was like the main channel. And in one of the siege, the Dutch make two sieges in the island of Mozambique to the Portuguese, one in 1607 and one in 1608. And in one of the sieges, the Portuguese found, to their dismay, that the Dutch ships were coming through the South Channel.
They're like,
no, but that you could not navigate because it was too shallow.
Yeah.
Well, it was too shallow for the Portuguese.
Not for them.
Not for the Dutch. So the Dutch went in the, let's say, from the backyard of the island of Mozambique. They managed to conquer part of the harbor. They never managed to conquer the fortress of San Sebastian. That's why they make a second siege in 1608. But that forced the Portuguese to build a second fortress in the south of the island of Mozambique to prevent this from happening again. And I'm bringing this up because during that battle, in that siege, the Dutch lost one ship, which was the Zierikzee, and ran aground and ended up summoning Cabeceira, which is a little bit further north of the island of Mozambique. And I have read the accounts of the Portuguese going and check on the ship, the Zierikzee, that was sunk there, and how surprised they were finding out in the naval construction of the ship, how did the Dutch manage to have, for instance, two covers of wood in the hull to make it lighter, and therefore it would be with less draft, so they could go in shallower places and make the boat faster. So many times that you hear, and this happened a lot when you are studying historical documents, that you hear, okay, this nation set its own boat afire, so the enemy could not profit from it. That is not only related to the treasure that this boat could have been carrying, it's the boat itself.
I found it amazing. One of the episodes that we shot, you told me about this before this episode. You told me about this fact, and I found it so interesting. And I guess we always assume that they weren't as smart or whatever, or as knowledgeable, since the technology was so different back then from today. But it was shockingly in a cool way to see, wow, they set their own stuff ablaze to keep sake of their engineering intel or anything like that, which is things that then we saw probably in many other wars. But I think, not probably, but I think the Germans also in World War I and II were keeping safe certain things of their engineering, so the enemies or the other allies from the other side wouldn't know what their next step or what their technology was. I think the Soviets as well were very known for keeping a lot of their technology hidden, so probably they did similar actions like this. So yeah, it's really impressive to see how they were like, oh, not only we're burning down our own stuff, or we're making sure that you cannot replicate it.
Yeah, it's impressive to realize, because when you read these documents and when you research these documents, you always wonder, okay, for instance, the Nuestra Señora de Consolação that we have talked so much in our episodes there in the island of Mozambique, it was sunk during an attempt from the Dutch to steal the boat from the harbor. Then the San Sebastian fortress, the fire on them, and they couldn't, so the ship went adrift and stopped in a reef and broke down there. And the Portuguese went in the evening and burned the boat. They burned the boat down to the water because they didn't want the Dutch to get the boat as a prize. So you will be thinking, okay, there was no treasure on the boat. We knew that because they put the treasure in the fortress weeks before the Dutch arrived. So they were not fearing that will be losing any money itself, like coins or gold or
cash,
whatever.
literal cash.
Any cargo.
Yeah.
They were worried about the boat. They didn't want the Dutch and the British to take anything from that boat that they can research and study the way that they built the ships.
Because maybe I'm completely wrong, correct me if I'm wrong, if not, I cut it out of the video. For example, one could say the astrolabe is one of those things, no? Because the astrolabe was mainly used by the Portuguese and the Spanish, not, or was it used all around?
Well, earlier was used by the Spaniards and the Portuguese. Then the other countries, got hold on this and
okay, so they sold it.
Also astrolabes.
It wasn't a prize technology that they weren't sharing.
I don't know how this technology went through other countries or other powers, other nations. I don't really know that. But the fact is that things like the way that they built the ships, it was very important for them to keep for their own, that nobody else would share that. And these are the two examples just in the island of Mozambique, that the Portuguese were really impressed how the Dutch built their ships when they found and they visit the shipwreck of the Zierikzee, and then the Portuguese making every effort that the Nossa Senhora de Consolação would not be viable for the Dutch to get there and study it. Other point is, yes, as you just have mentioned, the navigation instruments. Why? Because remember that these powers, these countries, they were trying to spread around the world and find new places and try to get new riches from the different places. But you need to get there. Navigation was the way of doing it, so the only way they could travel so long distances was by ship, and they need to navigate and get to those places. So whoever had the best navigational instruments and whoever had the best nautical chart, it will have an advantage. I have read many documents in the archives regarding this, how intense were the efforts of each of the countries trying to get hold on the nautical chart of this guy from Portugal or this other guy from Spain and this guy from the Netherlands.
Because one depends on the other. You cannot have good, accurate nautical charts without good, accurate navigational instruments because you don't get there. It's literally.
But this became a very serious issue. I mean, it's like if today you're trying to get the information that another country has regarding positioning like GPS. If you have a GPS which for you works okay, but suddenly you found out that your neighbor has a GPS that is way better because it also have the traffic information and also have which shops are open at that time. You know, this kind of thing. You want your neighbor's GPS.
Yeah.
So this same happened, which higher implications than what I'm saying, but between the countries. And there is a very interesting example. Portuguese and Spaniards, they both use astrolabes, but Portuguese were more prone to go to the south, to the southern hemisphere. Spaniards were a little bit more focused in the northern hemisphere. They were going all the way to America and then on the other side, Philippines, but they were always pretty much working in the northern hemisphere, and the Portuguese wanted to go south. And one thing that happened with the astrolabe is that the Iberian astrolabes that we think they were inherited from the Arabs, that they were using them in the desert. But one thing it was that they were scaled 0, 90, 0. The scale of the astrolabe. 0 degree, 90 degrees, 0 degree. That is very good to navigate in the northern hemisphere, guiding yourself by the pole star. You have the pole star, and this is your reference to know in which latitude you are. And this is how Spaniards and Portuguese were using the astrolabe in the early days of this expansion through the world. But then the Portuguese, and this is something that has always been super fun to me, then the Portuguese started going south and they couldn't see the pole star anymore. So the astrolabes, in the way that they were built, they were kind of becoming useless because they could not use the pole star as a reference, because after going down from the equator,
you don't see
the
it
pole star is less and less visible, and then it's gone. So the king sent it, he made like with the mathematicians council in Portugal to come up with the solution. And the solution was, yeah, well, you cannot bring up the star, so you have to find a solution for that. So instead of using this graduation of 0 degrees, 90, and 0, the Portuguese turned it around and put 90, 0, and 90, meaning that they could navigate the southern hemisphere, but in this case, relying much more on the sun than the pole star.
Yeah.
And this was very, I would say, very clever.
Yeah.
And it gave them the advantage. Remember, the Portuguese, together with the British and then the Dutch, they went all around Africa to go to the east, to India and Indonesia and Japan, as far as they got. Not to the Philippines because the Spaniards were there, but the Spaniards were there because they went through the back door. They went through the Pacific, not the Indian Ocean. But it kind of gives you the sense of how important this kind of information was. Remember that even Portugal and Spain were together as country for quite some years, like 60 years. And this kind of information was not like freely exchanged between the navigators. That was like a patrimony of one country against the other one. Then it proven right at that time because the Portuguese were able to navigate to the southern hemisphere much better than the Spaniards. Obviously, the Spaniard, there was not too long that they cut out, the same. Either they got it from Portuguese maker of astrolabes or they just figure out themselves. Because if the Portuguese could figure it out, the Spaniards would have figured it out as well. But these kind of little details, it makes my job first a little bit more complicated, but also a little bit more exciting because you have to figure out in which of the moments and in which historical context this ship wrecked and why they decide to burn it and put it down, why one of the first things that they rescue were the nautical charts and the astrolabes, for instance, even before the money that they were transporting. That should ring a bell for you and say, why these guys were so interested.
The only thing that I'm thinking that I wanted to ask from the beginning that I haven't been able to, because they love bringing it up, why are we not talking about the Belgians? They weren't that important and that relevant, or?
Oh, well, they were, but not in the level of the Dutch, the British,
the English, the
Spaniards,
Spanish,
the English, Spanish, and Portuguese. I mean, yes, well, the Belgian, the Danes, they all had an impact in this time, and the French. But if we need to mention,
I forgot about the French.
If we need to mention 4 powers, there would be the powers I'm talking today. You know? Spain, Portugal, Great Britain, and the Netherlands. So, guys, I wanted to share this with you because for me, even working in this area for many years, it is always super interesting to try to crumble down your information to make sense of what had happened. Because some of the actions you read in the files and you can then confirm in the archaeological material that you find may seem illogical. But if you know the context and what they were doing and why, then it starts making sense. So, for me, it's captivating. This is something which is very attractive.
It's something that happens to me almost every episode where I'm like, wow, how arrogant, quote unquote, of me or probably of most people it is to think, they probably didn't think that way or they weren't privy to these type of situations back then. No, humans have been humans and behaving sneakily since day one. So it's not something that we invented in the 90s or anything like that. Main thing for me every time that we talk about these episodes where I realize, wow, human nature really hasn't changed a lot. We're still the same.
Well, remember that even if archaeology, it's a tool that we use to learn from our past, but it's mainly related to who we were at that time.
Correct.
History and archaeology both come together to tell you that story. And it's super interesting to my perception, from my point of view. It's super interesting to know in which moment these guys were using this tool and the other guys were really wanting to get this tool. And that will explain some of the actions they took, and that if you don't know that, you will simply say, but they were stupid. Why they did this? And it has a reason. It always has a reason. And sometimes it's a reason that even today we can understand and share. That I would have done the same.
And that's what's surprising to you, and that's what's surprising to me is exactly that fact. Is like, oh wow, we still have very similar decision making and issues than we did back then. We're not that different at all.
Exactly. I wanted to share these examples with you and give you a little bit of a context of that espionage and war secrets and really highly sensitive information is not something very new. This comes since ever. And if you like the video, please give it a like, share it with your friends, subscribe to the channel if you haven't done it. And let's keep on diving.